This is Lightning Power Lunch on the Lightning Audio Network with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli.
We're back. Well, you were back last week.
Yeah.
And now I'm back.
You had a nice 2 weeks away from the microphone, my friend.
Away from the microphone.
I guess it wasn't that nice. This is probably this is a nice break for you in the course of your, because you have really another job that does not involve you talking on a microphone for 60 minutes a day. So this is probably a nice little hiatus for you.
Sometimes 30 minutes. Depends on the client.
Well, I meant
and
you
how
and
much
me.
I have to talk to them.
You and me
That's
take
right.
an hour, but
That's right. That's right. So
well, welcome back.
Great. Yeah, this is quite a treat. We knew that I think people wanted more hockey talk, locally, and obviously talking about the playoffs, which we can get into. But I think just having an outlet to talk about the Lightning, even if it's once a week, I think a lot of people crave that. And you and I had touched on this before. A disappointing end to the year. I do think an interesting offseason for the Lightning, more so about the Lightning and not necessarily the mentality, but are there going to be any changes, any significant changes for a team whose expectations are always Stanley Cup, and they have fallen short over the last couple of years. Doesn't make them a bad team. They're still a really good team. I think it kind of reiterates the point you and I have discussed. The playoffs are just a different animal. And I think we're seeing that.
We're seeing that. I mean, we're seeing that in the second
sure.
round as well.
I'm not getting my Sam Bennett jersey anytime soon, but he's certainly making his impact.
I don't think Leafs Nation is getting a Sam Bennett jersey either. Well, it's funny. We just kind of arbitrarily picked Wednesday as the day. I don't know if that's going to continue through the playoffs, but last Wednesday, Eric sat in and literally, as we were going on the air, news broke that the Lightning had re-signed Jonas Johansson. So we were thinking, we're just going to kind of do Lightning kind of season recap talk and maybe look at some of the other playoff series. But we had Lightning news. So lo and behold, 1 week later, here we are going on the air. We have Lightning news, not on ice, but off ice, relating to television broadcast. Moving forward,
it's a big part of how people consume. Of course, getting their news here. But what is it? Multi-year media rights agreement with Scripps Sports. Right?
This is like when you and I were growing up. You had your teams on television over the air television.
Right.
That's what this is. Panthers did this. There have been some other teams in the NHL that have done it. Vegas.
Right.
I had the list, and I don't have it in front of me. Is it Utah? Steve gave me the thumbs up. I think the Lightning are the 6th team in the NHL to do this. And FanDuel was part of this Diamond Sports Group that had bankruptcy issues. The teams that are kind of staying with their regional networks tend to be with different regional networks. I mean, there are still some FanDuel teams out there, but, for example, the Bruins are with Nesson. Yeah. I don't think they're going anywhere. Teams that were with FanDuel are looking for other options, and the Lightning are kind of following the footsteps of our Florida neighbors, basically. Yep. And I think the Scripps deal has worked very well for the Panthers. So basically what you're doing is you're opening up the market to anybody who has a television, as opposed to having a television with a very specific cable provider. We don't need to get into the backstory of how things got complicated in our market, but suffice to say, there are a lot of people who had a television who cannot get, or at least easily get, Lightning games on TV. That should no longer be an issue. Usually the sacrifice, though, is you are losing dollars in terms of the rights fees, and I don't know what that looks like, how this deal is exactly constructed, but obviously it was palatable enough for the Lightning to say that, we may not be getting the same dollar amount from Scripps, but think of all of the new fans that are going to be able to watch games. They may not be new fans, but fans that weren't able to get the games easily before, now they will. I mean, deal. I cut the cord. Right? I cut the cord personally with cable several years ago.
Yeah.
And I will say, it's not the easiest thing in the world to get games.
Sure.
I mean, we have streaming services, but it's kind of like, which streaming service do you have? Can you access it? I know YouTube TV has kind of become an option. Sling TV is an option, but it's kind of like, how many of these providers do you want to have, right?
Yeah, and what's the cost?
So now, if you don't want to have any streaming services, you just want a television with an antenna, you can put on channel 66 and get the Lightning games.
It's pretty impactful, to your point. A lot of people out there that have cut the cord. And to be able to see the Lightning, a team who's been pretty successful, you're right. I think you want to talk about ways to grow the game and bring in new fans. This would be, I think, a pretty logical way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than have the Four Nations tournament in the middle of the year.
That can be a topic for another.
Right?
That can be a topic for another summer show.
That should be
maybe after the playoffs are done.
I don't know. We can go a lot of different directions today. I did just want to give you my quick thoughts on Johansson.
Yeah,
I'm happy he's back. I mean,
yeah.
I think
you wondered he may leave
you
for
just never know.
possible number one somewhere else.
Do you always want to try and prove yourself that you're the guy? I mean, I think everybody has that in the back of your mind, and maybe Johansson just got into a spot where he knows he's going to get X amount of games every year. He's going to be on a team that's pretty successful, loves Florida. His family's doing okay down here, and there's something to be said, I think, the older you get, to have a little more stability in your life. And
he got a raise. I mean, it wasn't a huge raise, but he got a raise.
He'll take it.
Yeah.
So a good move. I think it's an area you don't have to really worry about. And sometimes maybe you don't think about the backup goaltender, especially one who's playing behind Andrei Vasilevsky. But, that can be a weakness. If your backup goaltender is not very good and you've got to overextend your starter during the regular season, that could be a problem heading into the postseason. And I think having a pretty good tandem in place makes a lot of sense. So I was very happy that they brought him back and glad he got that deal done. He's a good goalie. And it's an area they don't have to worry about.
And he showed the Lightning. So from the Lightning's perspective, what they saw from Johansson was both a guy that, if Vasilevsky's unavailable, who can play a lot and do quite well, as he did in the opening 20 games of the season 2 seasons ago when he played 17 of those 20 games. But he can also be a guy who basically doesn't play for like 10 days. Comes in usually in a tough assignment. Second half of a back-to-back on the road against a rested opponent is usually what he's getting.
Sure.
Not always, but usually. And he can perform in that situation as well. For Johansson, so there are a couple of things that he decided he didn't even want to explore because he signed early. I mean, he signed before free agency is open. So he gave up the potential chance to go to a team and be a number one. Maybe those opportunities weren't going to be out there. Maybe he talked about it with his agent. That is off the table. So if he says, you know what, maybe I haven't showed enough to other teams that they would take a chance on me to be a number one, he could be a 1B. I mean, the Lightning are in the minority, Greg, as you have often discussed. There are only a handful of teams that have a clear-cut number one who's playing in that 60-plus game range where the other guy is getting 20. Most teams have a 1A, 1B. It may not be 41 and 41, but maybe it's, 50-30 or something like that. And Johansson didn't even want to explore that, where maybe he's the 1B, where he would have played more. So whether it was he just liked the Lightning organization, he liked the area, he's got a family, I mean, that's a consideration. He wanted the security of a 2-year deal, which he got, signed early. There's no uncertainty about where he's going to be next year. But that was the calculation that he made, and I agree with you. I think it's great news for the Lightning that they locked him up for 2 more years because he can do the job.
He can.
He can do the job that is assigned to him.
Proven commodity, which is, something that is nice to have in sports. We can get to some questions. A little later
Let's
on
dive into the playoffs.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know Lightning fans, I mean, they probably have an interest if they are still watching the games and following the games.
How many
in
are?
this Florida Toronto series. So a week ago, Florida and Toronto played one game. Toronto won that game 5-4. And what I said on the show with Eric was the Florida Panthers team that the Lightning saw looked nothing like the team that played in game one against Toronto. That by far, at least to that point, and I think even still, now that they've played 4 games in the second round series, was by far the worst defensive game Florida has played in the playoffs. And even in a regular season in which they were kind of just okay, that had to be one of their worst defensive games in weeks. They were horrific. Bobrovsky wasn't good. They were giving up breakaways. They were giving up odd mans, turnovers. Their forecheck was non-existent, basically. They had the one goal where Nye scored on a breakaway where they had 4 guys on the ice. Yep. The 5th guy jumps off the bench as Nyes is blowing past their bench. It's like, where was that team? The Lightning didn't see that team. They had an off night. They ended up losing game 2. I think they played better in game 2, but they gave up 4 goals. And they had a couple of cardinal sins there. They gave up a goal in the shift after they tied the game in the third period. Very un-Panther-like, basically. So they come home, they're down 0-2. What do we make of these last 2 games? Well, I will tell you, I had to take a trip to the Northeast last Thursday and Friday. I was flying back to Tampa on Friday evening. And so the wonders of technology today, I was able to watch the Florida-Toronto Game 3, a good portion of it, on the flight home. And that was a game in which Toronto scored a couple early goals, and they were up 2-0.
Right.
And it was around the latter part of the first period that the Panthers started to look like the Panthers the Lightning saw. Because early in that game, Toronto was getting out of the defensive zone, not easily, but consistently. They were chipping it out. They were making quick passes to get out of trouble. As that first period progressed, you could see the Toronto players in the defensive zone started looking like the Lightning players, dealing with this Florida forecheck. And the first goal that Barkov scored to get Florida on the board was a lucky goal. He threw it in front and went off a Toronto stick and in the net. But that was born from a turnover where Toronto had the puck in the defensive zone, pressure, lost the puck. Barkov has a lane to the net, throws it into the blue paint and deflects in. So now it's 2-1. Toronto would get the next goal on a power play. Florida completely dominated after that, in my opinion, from what I saw. Now, I landed, so I missed part of the third period, and I got home. I got to watch a little bit of the overtime. The Panthers found their game, and that just rolled right into Game 4. People are like, what's happening with the Maple Leafs? They can't generate, where's Matthews? Where's Marner? This is what the Panthers did to the Lightning. So we were kind of wondering, what would another opponent be able to do against Florida? Florida right now has grabbed control of the narrative in the series. I understand it's 2-2. It's a best of 3, and Toronto has the extra game at home. And maybe that will really help the Maple Leafs. But it's almost like the Panthers flushed out their system whatever was going on at the beginning of that series, and now they are on it again.
Right.
And we're going to see what happens tonight. They play Game 5. The team's got 2 days off in between Game 4 and Game 5. But that's kind of what I've seen in the series. And I do actually want to get in a little bit more, like, how has Toronto been able to score on Florida? Other than Game 4, Toronto was able to score some goals against the Panthers. How are they able to do that, particularly when they weren't getting breakaways necessarily? But that's what I've seen through 4 games. And I think the Leafs are going to have to figure out a way to knock the Panthers off their axis a little bit, because right now the Panthers are looking like, as I said, they did against the Lightning, where they're just, their forecheck is causing all kinds of problems for the Maple Leafs.
And that is something that the Lightning know very well. You allow the Panthers to get to their game. Now it becomes a situation where you think the ice is tilted in their favor. I think also, too, for Toronto, not to be hyperbolic, get too excited, because quite frankly, these are Florida and Toronto. We just want to see some good hockey. Maybe Lightning fans are rooting for the Panthers. I'm curious if Lightning fans are rooting for Toronto.
I'm not
based
sure
off
if
of their
Lightning fans
distaste.
are rooting for the Panthers.
Yeah, maybe they're not. A lot of people, well, we want
Yeah.
to keep it in Florida. We want to keep
The
it in
enemy
Florida.
of my enemy is my friend type
Yeah,
situation. At least
You
this
know,
year's enemy. A couple of years ago when the Leafs knocked off the Lightning and played the Panthers in the second round, maybe Lightning fans are rooting for Florida then.
It might have been that
Not
way,
anymore.
For sure. I wonder if this is a pivotal moment for the core four. I want to make sure I say it appropriately,
Yes.
or else we'll get corrected on X. But it's a group who hasn't won anything, not because they're not talented. I think it takes some special mojo to have a great run in the playoffs. But I do think at some point somebody on that team, and it's going to be hard. You've made the point, and it's a great one. Knocking off the defending Stanley Cup champs is a hard thing to do. It just is. That
They had a chance, though. I mean,
They
Toronto
did.
is in
I mean-
overtime in Game 3. They had some looks.
I know.
One of those pucks goes in, it's 3-0.
Different tune.
And I don't
It's a
care
different-
how well the Panthers maybe are amping up their game. That's a
tough.
high wire
Yeah.
act that's very difficult to execute.
I
But
would
it
agree with
didn't
that.
turn out that way.
No. and now
Bobrovsky
you-
made a couple of saves in overtime, and the Panthers got to bounce. Marchand throws the puck at the net. It hits off Riley and goes in.
and you've given them life. Okay, so now you're dealing with all of that. You talk about the championship dinner. They know how to come back from the dead. Now they've got so now Toronto's got to deal with that.
Yeah.
But I do think if at some point Toronto's going to find themselves as one of the elite teams in the league, you got to find a way.
Game
Like,
5
this is
is
where
going
you
to be
put
a
your foot down.
response game. Game 5 is going to
Has
be a
to be.
response game for Toronto.
It has to be. And, if they lose the next two, if they lose the series, you do wonder if that management group in Toronto looks at the roster and says, okay, maybe we do have to tinker. Maybe it's more than tinkering to get over this hump that is plaguing us. And we acknowledge we've had some tough teams we've had to face in the playoffs, but we also have Hall of Famers on this team that we've given a lot of money to who we expect results. Look, you're in Toronto. I don't have to tell you this. You have to find a way. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you say it's just we're going to have to do something, not for the sake of doing something, but you almost have to just have the mindset what we're doing is not working. And
and if they
what are we
lose-
going to do about it?
because they had a 2-0 lead and they were up 2-0 and 3-1 in Game 3.
Yeah.
They're not gonna probably explore the nuance that I brought up, which was it's almost like the Panthers woke up at 2-0.
Right.
And they were like, time to amp it up, boys.
Yep.
And even then, like, they needed some plays that they had to make in order to win Game 3, but they got the win. So the biggest difference to this point between the Panther Lightning series and the Panther Toronto series has been that Toronto, up until Game 4, was able to score some goals. And I talked about the nightmare defensive game the Panthers had in Game 1. But they were still making some mistakes in Games 2 and 3. Mistakes that we weren't really seeing them make against the Lightning defensively. But one thing that I noticed, and this was a common denominator in more than just a goal or two for the Leafs, Mitch Marner is wristing pucks from distance quickly, and they are getting through. Now, some of that is, I'll use this word, the brilliance of Marner.
Yeah.
Marner is very, very good in this regard. But we talked about some of the Lightning players winding up for big slap shots. The winning goal in Game 2, Marner, this is the after the Panthers had tied it at 3. Marner gets the puck along the sideboards. He's at the top of the circle. Wrists it to the net, and it was a seeing eye shot. Like corner of the crossbar and the post on the far side. You hear it clang off the post and go in. But how was he able to get the shot through? Part of it was he wristed it. First goal the Leafs scored in Game 3. Marner at the blue line, wrists it to the net. Save, Knives there for the rebound goal. The 3-1 goal, the one they scored on the power play. Same deal. Marner's at the blue line. No big slap shot. He just snaps it at the net, and Tavares got a stick loose and deflects it in. So some of it was Toronto was able to capitalize on some mistakes that Florida made. But I think that it is interesting that this approach, and they used this approach against the Lightning in 2023. I mean, think about the goals that Morgan Riley scored in that series. Wrist shots from the point that are like finding their way through like bodies and sticks and skates and, ending up going on net. Maybe they go in, maybe there's a save and a rebound. But there is something to this that seems to work if you have the right players. Not everyone can do it. Marner knows where to wrist the puck. He's not just flinging it at the net. He's probably doing it with a mind of getting it past the first would-be shot blocker. But it's finding its way through. Now, they weren't able to do that in Game 4, I think in part because they got dominated, right? But that's one thing I noticed, that the Lightning really didn't do that in their series. And maybe it would have helped them. I don't know. I mean, the guy I'm mentioning is a world-class player, but the Lightning have those players too.
Makes sense. Yeah, I agree.
Phil was saying through the series, enough with the big slap shots, right?
Yeah.
He was saying that.
Well, certainly. I mean,
yeah.
In the Lightning series, he really felt that was a problem, for the Lightning, that too much winding up and not enough pucks actually on net.
Right.
It's funny. In the playoffs, it is true. I mean, I'm sure there's data to back it up, but it really is. I mean, how many times do you see an innocent-looking shot change directions 2 or 3 times? In the playoffs, you just have so many bodies in front because you're fighting for every inch of ice, that every possession is so valuable.
Yeah.
That it does make sense in the playoffs. Maybe not in the regular season. Maybe we can have a conversation about that down the road. But I think in the postseason, yeah, I don't that notion that I need to wind up probably doesn't make a lot of sense in today's game. Speaking to your point, partner, FKA322 on YouTube says, which second-round team looks the most impressive right now? Now, look, I think you brought up a good point. Is Florida starting to buzz, and would you put them in that right category? And I think that's actually a fair point. I think what Dallas has been able to do with Winnipeg has been impressive, just because I think Winnipeg, there's expectations there. For Dallas, too, but I feel like we've heard it a lot about Winnipeg and Hellebuck and where are they. But, to be up 3-1 in that series, I think is pretty interesting. That's not 2-2. That's 3-1. You've got some room there.
Well, Rantanen is the early leader for the Conn Smythe, clearly. I mean, he single-handedly got Dallas past Colorado in the first round and has been very, very impactful in the series as well. So I think that what we have seen in this Florida-Toronto series is, even if Florida wins it, Florida is human. Like, Florida is not just a machine that you wind up and the Panthers are just going to play championship-level defense in every period of every playoff game, because they haven't at points in this Toronto series. Now, they have, certainly in Game 4, and I think for a good portion of Game 3. We'll see if that continues. I will actually say the team that I am curiously watching, and I mentioned them last week with Eric, is Carolina. Because, so you and I have had a lot of conversations about Carolina, because they are in some ways a perplexing team, because there's no question that they are a top team. You don't do as well as the Hurricanes have done in the regular season year after year after year after year after year, with Brind'Amour as the coach, coaching them to play a certain style. Players have come, players have gone. Whoever they seem to slot in does very, very well. And then they always win a round. It's not like they're going out in the first round, but they either can't get past the second round, they can't get past the third round. They've not made it to a Stanley Cup final, and the question is why? Like, why have they not done it? And maybe there is something kind of, as you have advanced, something is missing in terms of having game breakers, which you may need when push comes to shove in a playoff series. That may be. Or maybe it's just in a particular series, the breaks haven't gone their way, right? Or maybe the way they play in the regular season doesn't as regularly transfer to playoff success. Who knows? Frankly, I'm a little surprised that they haven't been to a Stanley Cup final based on their pedigree. They look legit. So some of this is they played a New Jersey team that had a lot of injuries and got more injuries through that first round series. But Washington is fairly healthy. Washington did not have an overly taxing first round series in that they knocked off the Canadiens in 5. I mean, some of the games were close, yes. And they finished with the number 1 seed in the East this year. By any measure, they had a very, very good team. And, I mean, game 1, Carolina just dictated the terms of game 1. Attempts were 94-34, Carolina. And Washington D'd up, and eventually Carolina won in overtime. They haven't had that big of an advantage in the next 3 games,
right?
But they have been able to make plays, and I think it has really helped them. Kind of to your point, like who's going to make a play for Carolina? Well, at the start of game 3, I was watching that game. Washington was dictating the terms of how that game was going, but they couldn't score. Right. Anderson was making big saves, and then Carolina, boom, score. And they kind of rode that wave of momentum. So if it's Carolina getting past Washington and the Hurricanes have a 3-1 lead, I don't know what's going to happen if they end up playing Toronto. But if Florida advances, this is going to mean a lot to Carolina to return the favor on the Panthers. Because if you remember, Greg, 2 years ago, they met in the conference final. The Panthers swept the Hurricanes. And Rob Brindamore was like at a loss for words how they lost each and every one of those games that could have easily gone the other way. Hurricanes could have swept the Panthers that year.
Yeah.
That's how close those games were. And every single coin toss came up. If you have the Panthers on one side of the coin and the Hurricanes on the other side of the coin, you flip 4 coins, one after the other, and it came up Panthers, every single one. This is going to be a series. The Hurricanes are ready to serve a dish ice cold to the Panthers. This is going to mean a lot for Carolina. I'm projecting that Carolina advances, and maybe the Panthers do too. So we're like, who can beat the Panthers if they play this way? Well, you know, the Panthers' forecheck is tough to handle, but so is Carolina's. And, you know, I think that would be a very interesting series. But the fan asked, like, who's been impressive?
Yeah.
Some of the teams in the West have been impressive. Yes.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that. Especially, to me, Dallas. I agree with you. They're getting great goaltending from Ottinger, too.
Yeah.
Great goaltending. Right now in this series, especially. But watch out for Carolina. Now, if Washington comes back and wins the next 3, take what I said with a grain of salt and put it in the garbage, and these questions about Carolina will continue. But they look really, really good right now.
I think you bring up a good point about being hungry if they end up taking on Florida. We're looking ahead, but let's assume.
Yeah.
The other thing, too, is the way they play. There is something to be said for fatigue for teams that have long playoff runs the previous year, which obviously Florida has.
Yeah.
You play a taxing team like the Hurricanes. That's a tough matchup. Now, you could say it's a tough matchup for Carolina, too, and I would agree with you. But to your point, you've got some motivating factors here. You have a tone for what happened a couple years ago, to your point. I think there's also this huge monkey that Carolina's got to deal with about, similar to Toronto. You know, you've been a really good regular season team. You've come close a couple of times in the postseason, but what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And to me, would Florida be an interesting opponent for them to take advantage circumstantially too? You have all these other X factors that could feed into getting you over the hump. You still got to do it. We know that. In Florida, if they do advance beyond Toronto, they're going to be a tough out because they're going to smell back-to-back.
Yes,
and that's
they
a
are.
pretty big deal. But that would be a taxing series, whoever comes out of that one.
You would
because I think they both play at a, I don't want to say similar.
High
maybe
octane.
Yeah, I think that's the way to put it. So that would be interesting. Andy Or excuse me, let's see. Addie on Facebook says almost every fan base is rooting for the Panthers to lose.
Yes.
That's the. I appreciate that.
I sense that is the way the wind is blowing. Yes.
I appreciate that. There's no doubt about it.
They are not a beloved franchise right now outside of South Florida.
If Sam Bennett was a member of the Tampa Bay Lightning, would he be your favorite player? I think that would also be an interesting question. Lee on Facebook says, when the Bolts get eliminated, I root for the West. I'm pulling for Dallas. Okay.
Yeah, Dallas has been a team, like they've gone deep in the playoffs for a few years in a row now and lost. And so, I think there's some sentimentality there for a team that has sniffed it, kind of like Carolina, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I watched the game last night. Winnipeg played a game that you would expect a team down 2-1, potentially going down 3-1 to play. I mean, they generated enough chances to win that game. And ironically, the one goal they scored was probably not a great goal for Ottinger. It was from the side.
Yeah.
That Ehlers scored, but goodness gracious, was Ottinger good. So I noticed a couple of things. He was really good at just making saves. He made saves on scoring chances. He also made saves on shots from distance through screens. And then the other part that was really noticeable to me was that the Jets did everything right. Like they got traffic to the net, pucks to the net, screens. Their players are there for rebounds. The Dallas Stars defenders, I'm saying defenders, but it's mostly the defensemen, they boxed out so well that when Ottinger had to make a tough first save, usually from distance, like he's screened, he's trying to find it, it hits him, it's laying there in a precarious area, and it was a Dallas player who got to that puck first. There were not a lot of like shot, save, rebound chance for Winnipeg. And I think that's a credit to how hard the Stars defended in front of their own net. I thought that was the key to the win. Hellebuck, I think, also gave up one iffy goal, but that's even. Both goalies gave up an iffy goal. The second and third goals scored by Dallas were not iffy goals. They were great shots, but the difference was that Ottinger stopped some of those chances that Winnipeg generated and Hellebuck didn't. And your favorite former Pittsburgh Penguin, Greg, Mikhail Granlund, who is flailing away. Maybe he's not flailing away. He'd been playing well for them. But, I mean, here he is in San Jose, en route to missing the playoffs again, right? And he gets traded to Dallas well before the deadline. And he's like, thank you. One of a number of Finns on this team. Yeah. And, I mean, you expect of the Finns, maybe it's Rantanen, maybe it's Hintz, Miro Heiskanen came back. Who knows? Would he have an impact? It was Granlund who has the hat trick and helps them win the game. Granlund and Ottinger were the biggest reasons why the Stars won that game. So, to your point, it could have been 2-2.
Yeah.
I think Winnipeg played well enough to get to 2-2. But the goalie was the X factor. And Winnipeg, I haven't really addressed this, but I'm going to bring it up again because I've been very consistent talking about it. Penalty killing. Winnipeg Jets won the President's Trophy this year, and they had far and away the best defensive numbers in the NHL. A lot of people think Hellebuck is going to win the Hart Trophy. He is a finalist. All of that is true. Their penalty killing was not great this year. It was a middle-of-the-pack penalty kill. In fact, I think we even had Paul Edmonds on with us. I know we had him on when the Jets played here, came into the studio, and he was talking about the penalty kill. He's like, this has been a little bit of a soft underbelly. Well, what have I said about what you need in the playoffs? If your penalty kill is leaky, it can be a real drag on your ability to win games.
Yeah.
And Winnipeg has not been a top penalty kill team in the playoffs. Actually, we'll pull up the numbers here. So on penalty kill, remember, there are 16 teams that have playoff numbers. Winnipeg Jets are 9th. The Lightning actually finished with a higher penalty kill percentage than where Winnipeg is at right now. And so when you look at, like, how has Dallas done it? Well, last night they scored 2 power play goals. They win the game 3-1. Winnipeg's penalty kill could not bail them out. Carolina, which has traditionally had a fantastic penalty kill during the regular season, pretty much you can lock it in. They're going to be a top 5 penalty kill, sometimes top 3. But in some of the playoff years, their penalty kill has been really subpar, and they've lost as a result. This year, Carolina's penalty kill in the playoffs, 92.6%. So we look at the Hurricanes. They won their first round series in 5, and they're up 3-1 in this series. So they played 9 games. They're 7-2 in those 9 playoff games. Maybe not coincidentally, their penalty kill is over 90%, right? So
interesting.
I think that this is Winnipeg's going to have to tighten things up because that series has been kind of relatively speaking lower scoring. It has been. Game 1 was 3-2. Last night's game, I mean, Dallas, I think they may have scored a late goal and an empty netter, but it was a 3-2 game, right?
It was.
Until oh no, I'm mixing it up. They won what did they win last night?
3-1.
Yeah,
3-1.
so it was a 2-1 game until Granlund scored that third period power play goal, which came at the halfway point. So like you're in low scoring games, giving up a special teams goal could mean the difference between losing or getting a game to overtime.
What do you make of Ranton and how well he's played?
Fantastic.
I mean, it's just incredible.
I actually didn't watch a lot of the early part of the Dallas-Colorado series where Ranton had 1 assist in the first 4 games, but he looks dynamite. So, like, there was some criticism of the Lightning's top players after the Florida series. Like, why are they not making more of an impact? You watch Mikko Rantanen, he is making an impact just about every time he is out on the ice. And again, he's doing it against, yes, on the power play he's had an impact, but he's doing it against the best defensive team in the NHL this year, and they were the best defensive team 5-on-5 in the NHL this year. And they can't seem to slow down Rantanen.
He's been incredible.
He's dealing right now. He's like Braden Point was in that 2021 playoff run where he scored a goal in, 9 straight games or whatever.
And that's one of those situations, in addition to, playing tough and tight checking, some of the X factors, too. You need your star players. You and I have talked about that over the years. Lightning, in a lot of instances, sometimes their star players able to take over for a series. Kucherov, Point, they've done it when they've won cups basically through the whole cup run. I mean, Rantanen's showing that. An elite player can win you some games or be a big part of why when you get hot.
He's losing confidence, too.
That's it.
Like, when
he's
you get
confident,
a top player who's got that swagger.
Yeah, it's that you hit the nail on the head. That's a big part of it. But it's fun to watch when you see a player like that have things going on.
I just want to touch on the Edmonton-Vegas series. So Edmonton is – I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around what Edmonton has done in the playoffs, and this is unfair. This is an unfair bias on my part. But they looked dead in the water when the Lightning saw them in late February, and it is rationally I understand. 1 game out of 82 – at the time that you're seeing a team does not tell the whole story. I thought McDavid and Draisaitl were great in that game, but they were basically among the forwards. They were the only ones doing anything. That was right after the Four Nations face-off.
Yeah.
Jack Michaels joined us, and he's like, the Oilers they're slow. It's like they lost McLeod from last year's team. They lost Dylan Holloway. Like they missed Dylan Holloway. They missed Ryan McLeod. They missed Philip Broberg. So, look, they added some guys at the deadline. They added Trent Frederick. I think that the moves they made have made sense. But they were having a big-time problem against the Kings in the first round. And they looked like they weren't going to win that series. They could have lost in 4 straight to the Kings. They had to rally in the third period to win games 3 and 4. But they have it going now. There's no question. Corey Perry's playing like I think he just turned 40 or he's about to turn 40. He's playing like he's 30. Yeah. And they don't look slow.
Right.
I don't think their goaltending has been great. Their penalty kill has been bad throughout the playoffs, in part because the Kings scorched them. The Kings power play was fantastic. So when you look at Edmonton's penalty kill percentage, it's very, very low. And Vegas has scored on the power play too. But this has been the weird instance in the playoffs in which the Oilers have kind of outscored their problems in that they came from behind to win. What was it, like 6 straight games where they were trailing?
Yeah.
That's very unplayoff-like. Now, the last game, they grabbed the lead and held it. And, we'll see if that continues. I guess I'm surprised. I mean, maybe I shouldn't.
Should we have Jack on next
week?
week?
Well, they did get to the final last year.
Right.
And there's no question that their top guys are dealing. Like McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard.
Yeah.
They are doing a lot of damage offensively. It's just that they're not really defending all that well in a lot of these games, but it hasn't hurt them.
Henrique, right? Gets
Henrique,
a couple goals.
yeah, they got some depth scoring.
Which is nice. But you're right about when we did talk to Jack, it was they're slow. They've got some issues, but what's the other X factor in the playoffs? I mean, you could be playing well at the right time.
And McDavid's not slow. I mean,
no, he's the
may be as a whole kind of a slower team. Although I think some of the guys they added at the deadline have helped with their team speed.
Sure,
but I don't know. I still feel like they have to show me, which is unfair, and I'm not staying up that late to watch every minute of all of their games, but I guess just based on how they looked down the stretch in the regular season, and they started that King series so poorly, I'm just a little surprised they are where they are, but they keep winning. So
you mentioned, it's a good point, the show me. I think we have a lot of teams remaining for show me. Is there one in particular you think that's got more of that to prove? Because you can say Edmonton, you can say Dallas, you can say Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Over in the East, certainly you can say Toronto, but you can also say Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, is there one that sticks out more? Because the more I'm talking about, I'm like, you know what, man.
Well, the only team that doesn't have to show us is Florida, because
right.
Champs.
I mean, they've done it, so they get the benefit of the doubt there. But I mean, you're right. Out west, there's a few teams there that you're like, all right, what are you gonna do?
Well, and I don't think Hellebuck played badly last night. I mean, I said the first goal, I wasn't crazy about that goal. The D backed in. It was on the penalty kill for Winnipeg. But, Ottinger gave up one that probably he should have stopped too. So if we're going to say, all right, that was a push. But there's no question Hellebuck has had not the playoff that he would have liked. I mean, he was downright awful in that St. Louis series in the 3 games that Winnipeg lost at St. Louis. The home team won every game in that series. And he had some problems in Game 7, early in Game 7. Gave up a couple of goals early. Probably it wasn't all him, but, had some problems there. So I'm not sure that he's answered those questions. He's been pulled, and I think he was pulled in all 3 of the games that the Jets lost in St. Louis in that first-round series. And it's just an interesting dynamic in that probably the 2 highest ranked and best regarded U.S. goalies are playing in this series. And at the Four Nations, Hellebuck had the net and Ottinger backed up. With the Olympics next year, is that paradigm shifting a little bit?
Yeah, right.
Based on, because Ottinger has been, I mean, yes, he gave us some goals in the Colorado series. I understand that. But, his numbers have been better than Hellebuck's. And he was fantastic last night in the pivotal swing game, up 2-1, Game 4 at home. He got their team into the win column, and now they're 1 game away from eliminating the Jets.
You've got some goaltenders, too, who have done a lot in the regular season that are looking to take that next step in the postseason. And I think you just mentioned Ottinger and Hellebuck. I mean, those are 2 guys that, when you talk about the best goaltenders in the game, and let's say you branch it out to 5, Vasi's going to be included in there, Shesterkin probably, but Hellebuck, Ottinger, probably in that top 5. When you say, I mean, I think it's pretty fair.
Yeah.
And then
there are 2 of the goalies that play 60 plus.
Yeah,
every
I mean,
year.
so those are that's an interesting matchup there on that side. And then Freddie Anderson, interesting.
Yeah, a lot of injury problems.
Issues. Yeah, he's had some health injuries, and we know. I think when he's healthy, he can be a difference maker, and we'll see how that does play out. So I think some goaltenders also that want to prove that they are Stanley Cup worthy. Tampa Bay on X Partner says the Leafs and Panthers series is reminding me of the Bolts Rangers series in 2022.
Yeah, it's not a
What do you
bad
think?
it's not a bad comparison in that, the Lightning were really not on their game when they lost
Yeah.
the first two in New York, and I think they were down by a couple goals in
I think
game
you're right.
3, rallied to win game 3. That was not overtime. Palat scored late in the third period, and then it was almost like the Lightning won game 5. That was a coin toss game. That was a late winning goal. Sergachev took a shot from the point, and it hit Palat and went in.
Right.
But the Lightning won that series by really clamping down defensively and flummoxing the Rangers' top players. And I think that some of that, I mean, it's not been a mirror image, but there's been some of that. This is a huge game. I think it's a bigger game tonight for Toronto than Florida. If Florida loses this game, they'll be like, we're okay. We'll just go home and take care of business in the next game. Toronto loses this game.
Yeah.
That's a tough one because now they're down in the series after they were up by 2 and up by 2 in game 3 with a chance to put the Panthers in a 3-0 series hole.
Gavin on YouTube says Carolina and Dallas/Edmonton looking dangerous. I'm rooting for Carolina at this point in the East.
Well, for the same reason we said Dallas, there's maybe some sentimentality. If you don't really have a dog in the hunt, you're just like, what team has been good, done well, but had heartbreak deep in the playoffs? Dallas has been the team in the West. Carolina has been the team in the East. Toronto has been the team in the East too, but they haven't gone deep.
I wonder, too, if you're rooting for teams or players at this point, if you're a Lightning fan. Is that another way to look at it?
Yeah.
Because, you can make the case, I don't want to see Florida win. I don't want to see Toronto win just because you want to see that streak of not winning a Stanley Cup continue.
Yes.
Just to have a lot of fun. Although I think that would be kind of interesting and probably fun for the NHL if Toronto were to win. But I don't know. Do you root for Connor McDavid more than you're rooting for the Edmonton Oilers? And maybe you're doing both, but maybe.
Yeah, maybe you enjoy seeing Connor McDavid play,
Maybe.
so you would like to see the Oilers
I think
advance.
that's fair.
On the flip side, one player that Lightning fans are rooting against, I am certain, is Matthew Tkachuk. And I bring him up because I read an article about Tkachuk following Game 4, where he's basically back to where he needs to be. And Paul Maurice in this article acknowledged that round 1, Tkachuk was using his kind of hockey sense and smarts to offset the fact that he had missed a couple of months. And I said as much, I think, on the air here, that to me it seemed like, I mean, he was active in the series, especially in the power play, but I wasn't sure that he was completely back. And apparently that was true. Now we're hearing that he's basically back to where he was before the injury, which is a scary notion probably for Florida's opponents. I mean, other than on the power play and other than the notable hit on Gensel at the end of Game 3, did we really notice Matthew Tkachuk as much as we normally do?
Probably
I think
not
if we're
on the
answering
surface.
this honestly, we'd say no, not really. And I think that was due to the fact that he missed 2 months. If we were to see Tkachuk play tonight, if you were watching the Panthers play tonight against Toronto, Tkachuk is more like Tkachuk.
The
and
question
that's normal.
becomes,
like if you miss 2 months, jumping into a playoff series, it's hard to just flip the switch that way.
For sure, especially with a lower
but he's
body
a smart
injury.
enough player to kind of play in a way that he was getting himself back to where he needed to be without hurting his team.
You wonder, too, if his presence was felt more.
I think you lost your mic there, Greg.
Oh, no. Can you hear me?
Yeah, he's going to reboot. I think we have a question I can get to. Steve, I have so many emails. I'm looking for... Here is a Power Lunch question. So this is from JR, number 1 Lightning fan. Goaltending seems to be off in the season's Stanley Cup playoffs, even for our own Vasilevsky. Do the stats show this? And if so, what do you think is the cause? Well, what Julien Brisebois said, JR, was he actually felt Vasilevsky played pretty well in the series against the Panthers. And I don't disagree with him. I think the Lightning, when they gave up chances, the chances they gave up were too juicy, And in games 2, 3, and 4, Vasi's save percentage was, I think, over 930 or something like that. Greg is back. I assume your microphone
Can
is
you hear me
working now? No,
Can
it's
you hear
not.
me?
Clearly, they don't want you to contribute
Come
on
on.
the show. So I actually do not completely agree that Vasilevsky's play was subpar. His numbers were, though. Like, if you give up 6 goals on 16 shots, which is what happened in game 1, then, you're going to have ugly numbers. I think there have been some series in which offenses have really ruled the roost, and Edmonton has been involved in a lot of those games. But if you look around kind of where things are in the second round, I think the Washington-Carolina series has been fairly well defended. I think the Dallas-Winnipeg series has been fairly well defended. And, certainly in the last game, Florida clamped down Toronto. So as we get deeper in the playoffs, JR, I think there's a stronger likelihood that we're going to start to see the goal numbers come down. The other part is that power plays have done well in the playoffs so far. I mean, I gave you some of the numbers. Carolina's the outlier, killing them at 92%, and the Lightning had a very, very tough series on the power play themselves. But other teams have done quite well in the power play.
Can you hear me now?
You, Greg. Yeah. So the question was about,
Gotcha.
is goaltending off in this playoff year? And my basic answer is there have been some games and some series where there have been more goals scored, but we're starting to see, like, the Carolina-Washington series is I think, more defensive in nature. I think Dallas-Winnipeg has been a little more defensive in nature, and we may start to see that trend line come through more as we advance into the Final Four and then the Stanley Cup Final.
One of the things we've talked about before on the show has been, sometimes that first round is the outlier. You may see some crooked numbers. You may see a little more shoddy play just because teams are filling each other out. You're maybe generally healthier in the first round than you are in the later stages of the playoffs. So maybe you're seeing different outcomes compared to second, third, and fourth round matchups. So I would just the observation might be that. I haven't looked at every game to tell you. Yeah, I feel like Hellebuck's angle has been a little bit off, through these first 4 games. That might be something more for our goaltender experts. But I would typically say I think sometimes in those early round matchups, they're not as indicative of how well a team can play defensively and in net compared to where you go, moving forward. So that would just be my initial conversation. What I was trying to say about Tkachuk, and before the mic stopped working, I think his presence being on the ice is something you can't really measure. And I think that probably had something to do with the Panthers being victorious in round 1. In other words, you didn't hurt us by not being 100%, but you being on the ice with us helped us. And it could have been in the locker room. It could have been him chirping, on the ice. It could be.
And that chirping has continued into round 2.
And that's what he does. And, I understand that. But, there is something to be said for, leadership comes in many forms. And for Tkachuk, maybe in round 1, partner, it was more about everything outside of actually being on the ice. But seeing him on the ice might have given his team an extra boost that they needed to beat a pretty good Tampa Bay Lightning team, for sure. So that would be my initial thought on that. I know you guys have to bounce, so we're going to cut the show short here a little bit. But we'll be back next Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
Noon to 1. And look,
I haven't looked at my schedule, but I think Wednesday.
Are you okay?
We're going to have a show next week.
We'll tweet
it's probably
something
going
out.
to be Wednesday.
Yeah, we'll tweet something out and let everybody know for sure. But partner, it was great seeing you again. And
likewise.
And thanks to Steve Erstick and everybody who listened to the show today. We appreciate it. We'll be here for you in the off season, and we'll be back at it again. For Dave Mishkin, I am Greg Linnelli and Steve Erstick as well. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.